Hi everybody, welcome back to the next episode in our chocolate series. Today we are going to do a quick comparison of cocoa powder versus physical chocolate. Now, as we mentioned in the last episode, and I'll put a link to that below or up here somewhere, who knows. We're going to use Urca cocoa powder, which is 22 to 24% fat, and Barima chocolate, which is 56% fat, not barium chocolate, as the autocorrect did on the last video. I'm pretty sure barium would not only taste really weird, but really be quite bad for you. So let's not make barium ice cream, okay? So to make these recipes, we're gonna make the fat content, the sugar content, the solids and everything approximately the same or as best as we can. We're gonna use two different ice cream calculators to do this. We're gonna use Dream Scoop's calculator for the cocoa powder version, and we're gonna use Patrick Svensson's ice cream calculator for the chocolate one. Not only is it the best ice cream calculator there is out there, it is the only one that you can actually put real chocolate in your calculations too. So we'll talk a bit about that as we do it in real time. So recipes for both these are below. They're nice and simple. We're not going to do any add-ins or fudge swirls or cookie dough or anything like that. Really plain chocolate ice cream to compare the results from two different sources of chocolate and how they compare, whether one is stronger in flavour, whether one has a nicer chocolate taste, whether they're different in texture, all those kind of things. So stick with us and we'll get round and get on to making them now. We are going to start with the cocoa powder version, as mentioned. And we're going to use the Dream Scoop's calculator for this. When you first open a calculator, you can see at the top that there are some figures for milk and cream fat percentage. You're going to need to change those for your own milk and cream numbers. Then add in the fat percentage of your cocoa powder in exactly the same way, working your way down the list, add in some numbers until you get a basic recipe of some kind. Once you've started, you can see here at the bottom that the total fats, milk solids, non-fat, sugars and total solids. Now you can just go back and start editing these numbers until you get something that's reasonable. I've continued editing this and ended up with something that is 17.9% fat, 9.3% milk solids non-fat, 18% sugars and 48% total solids. Now we move on to Patrick Svensson's calculator. When you open the software, you can click on the new and there are some guidelines there if you want to use them. But as we're not going to go anything really crazy, we're not even really going to produce a balanced recipe here. We're just going to produce a recipe. We'll start with new and blank. Here we'll click add ingredient and then work our way down through choosing the milk that we want with the right fat percentage, and we'll do the same for the cream. Then you can move on and start adding in your things like your sugar, your chocolate, and finally finish on your skimmed milk powder, or that's how I'd like to do it here. Now the chocolate options are there. You've got your milk, your dark, your semi-sweet and your true dark, all got the relevant macros in there, so make sure you add the right one. Now at this stage you can double click on the weight box and start inputting some figures. As you can see, the software will assist and show you the working numbers as you go. The graph or the bar graph in red shows areas that might need adjustment. Now just keep adding in your numbers and you can then see down the line we look at total sugars. Now this is one that I've added myself. It wasn't on there originally. Patrick showed me how to add this bar. I find it quite helpful. All the other numbers in there can be customized. You can just click on this button here, add in whatever bit of information you want, and it will really just be fully customizable to suit your needs. Each option here has a recommended level written underneath, so if you're not 100% sure on what it should be, just use these guidelines. Now if you click on this graph, this will show you your freezing temperatures and serving temperatures. Now we're not going for a balanced recipe here. This technically will go a little bit harder than I like to make my ice cream, and that's just down to sugar content really. But we'll go through that in another episode because this is quite an exhaustive bit of software and there's a lot here that you can do. As a matter of interest, gelato is generally served at -12 centigrade. So we're just going to start editing the numbers until we get something that we're more or less happy with. If you really want to add dextrose to a recipe, again, just to add it as a separate ingredient, start adding some numbers. That will have a real effect on your serving temperature, how hard your ice cream goes, because it's not as sweet as sucrose, but it affects the freezing point much more. So dextrose is really a great ingredient for ice cream makers. Anyway, we're not going to use it in this recipe, so we're just going to remove that. And we're left with a base recipe here. We're just going to adjust this back to where it was. And that's pretty much where we're going to end up. Now, this is another fun bit. You can actually rescale your recipes here. Once you're happy with the recipe, you can put in the total that you actually want to make, and the software will calculate it all for you. So you don't have to go old school and do maths, or if you're in North America, math. The calculator will do it all for you. You can make larger recipes, smaller recipes, whatever suits your machine. Most people generally try and work around a 1 litre size base, and then you can just halve it, double it, whatever you need to do. This will be exact. If you know your machine does really well with a 1.2 litre worth of base in there, start a recipe and then adjust using that method, and it will work it all out for you. Once you're happy with that, you can then save it to use later on. And what we've ended up with here is a recipe that is 18.8% fat, 9.6% milk solids non-fat, 17.8% sugar, and 42.5% solids. So we're not going to discuss how to make these bases. They're really simple. You've seen me do it hundreds of times. Just heat these up on your hob enough to melt the sugars and the cocoa powder and the chocolate, depending on which one you're doing. For the cocoa powder, keep that up to temperature for a good 5 minutes just to bloom the cocoa powder and bring that flavour out more. If you're making the physical chocolate version, make sure it's completely melted. It will get to a stage where it looks very bitty. You have to keep going past that until it turns nice and smooth. Once it's done, put them both in the fridge to chill, churn them as normal, and let's get scooping. Right, we've just taken both these ice creams out of the freezer. We're going to get some scooped and compare the two. So there's both in front of you. I mean, it's quite clearly a different effect based on what you use. So the one on the left is the cocoa powder, the one on the right is the physical chocolate. Now, with the recipes at identical or give or take fat contents, you run into some problems because there's no way to get the chocolate flavour with the physical chocolate or the same amount of physical chocolate as you would do with cocoa powder. Remember, cocoa powder is just intensified chocolate, essentially. That's what it is. So how does it taste? Two very different ice creams. Now, interestingly, this one, which is the physical chocolate, this 56% chocolate, it has the flavour of the chocolate itself come through, and it does come through reasonably well, but also you've got basically no colour. As you can see, the colour of the physical chocolate has just completely gone. And that's because you've melted the chocolate, the dairy has overtaken it, and essentially that's all they do when they create milk chocolate. They take a darker chocolate and add more milk to it. That's what you do when you create chocolate. So you've taken a 56% chocolate and brought it right the way down to, I dread to think of how low this would be as far as chocolate numbers is concerned. And something also to point out is the chocolate itself in this has started to freeze back together as the ice cream has been made. So it's almost giving you a really fine stracciatella kind of effect. And that's more likely because although chocolate has an emulsifier, and I think this one uses soy lecithin, it's obviously not enough to emulsify the chocolate within the dairy mix itself. So it starts to come back together. Whereas the cocoa powder is a different puppy altogether. It dissolves into your mix as long as you heat it up properly. It dissolves into your mix and becomes part of your dairy mix. So, texture-wise, they're the same. There's no real difference. There's no iciness to one or the other. They're very simple recipes, so that you can't really go wrong with these two. They're not going to break the bank as far as luxurious chocolate ice creams go, but that's not the point of this. This is to show the real-world difference between using physical chocolate and cocoa powder. Now, cocoa powder isn't all created equally. There are good, there are bad, there are ugly and indifferent. My personal favourite is Valrhona. It's also the most expensive cocoa powder that I know of. But Urca does a really good job. And there are some really nice ones. Calabo do a nice cocoa powder as well. It's lighter in flavour, lighter in colour. You know, so there are pros and cons for each one, like we mentioned before. Physical chocolate. Now, we'll do this in another episode, but
to get this kind of colour with physical chocolate is impossible. Because by the time you melt the chocolate, add it to the dairy, it lightens up in colour. Like this 56% has more than likely become somewhere in the single digits as far as milk chocolate is concerned. So if we used 100% chocolate, what would the effect be? Maybe we'll do that in the next episode. But cocoa powders, you could use any cocoa powder going, even the cheapest one, and you'll get something reasonably similar. Colour-wise, it differs depending on whether it's Dutch cocoa or not, whether it's a heavily Dutched cocoa. Heavily Dutched cocoa has an effect on the colour as well. So the more Dutched it is, which means treated with alkaline solution, the darker it can become as well. But profile of flavour changes at the same time. So if you really want bang for buck, you just can't beat cocoa powder. So next episode, we'll make a couple of different chocolate ice creams. We'll probably make a combination, so one that uses cocoa powder and physical chocolate, and then we'll try a different cocoa powder just on its own and see how they compare. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this next episode in our chocolate series. If you're interested in the ins and outs of chocolate ice cream, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.